All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. Hello, everyone. I'm Sasha Wolf, recording in Woodstock, New York, and joined as usual by my co-conspirator, the one and only Mr. Michael Chauvin Dalton. Hello, Michael.
Hey there.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm actually recording from my office today if my audio sounds a little different, because I'm in between classes and running around.
You're a very busy fellow.
Yes.
A lot of responsibilities. You have a dog with a cone on its head and...
Oh, yes. My poor dog had a little ear surgery, and it's funny,
Susie.
not funny. Everyone will know this who has a dog and has a pet with a cone. They run into everything, sometimes I think on purpose to get your attention. But poor Susie locked herself into the basement by closing the door when she was trying to get out. Yes.
Oh, God. Yeah, the cone of shame.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's awful.
Oh, because she has an ear thing, so they couldn't give her the inner tube.
Exactly. So, yeah, she has to have the full-on cone to keep herself from scratching. And we have a second dog who can stick her head in the cone and lick her ear. So we had to keep them away from each other.
Oh, just trying to be a good friend.
Exactly. Yes. You're like, oh, let me fix that for you.
Whenever when I get up in the morning, Peanut likes to, lick around my eyes and my ears and on my neck. And I'm like, I'm just hoping I taste sort of yummy and it's not because I'm like grimy or something. It's like,
That's
what are you
right.
trying to tell me? Okay.
Yes.
Digression number one.
Dog Talk with Sasha and Michael. It's a new show.
I'm in.
Oh, come
I'm in.
on.
Can we do it?
It would be the most ridiculous 2-hour episode ever.
I want to make that podcast. All right. Some couple of things actually related to the podcast. One,
Yes.
I begged people.
Begged, maybe berated? No, begged. That's right.
You and I are actually recording right now, and it's not just Sasha and Michael hanging out talking. And I think sometimes we forget that. Right. And just now I realized that a microphone in my face. Okay, so I begged people, I urged, I pleaded for donations and to support the podcast. And as I said then, and I'll reiterate, it's not to raise money particularly. We're going to be raising money from donors and grants, and we are, and blah, blah, blah. But I just think it's, an important part of being connected and involved and having some ownership in a way in the foundation. Anyway, you did. So thank you very much. A lot of people came through and donated anywhere from $10 to $100. And so thank you so much. That was really heartening and made us all feel really happy. So thank you.
And we got some nice comments about it too, about being on board. So that was nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other thing is just we've gotten some suggestions that our forum section is too persnickety. And
it's too locked in.
It's very locked in. So we heard that and we're making changes. So thank you very much for caring and letting us know that it didn't really work that well. And so for right now, we have an introduce yourself section that we just added. So please do introduce yourself. Other people have. And that's been really
I should
fun.
do that.
Yeah, you should do that. I did it. Taylor did it.
I know. I got to do it.
You're behind, man.
I am. And right, people wanted to be able to have more back and forth with each other.
That's right.
So Taylor's working on that.
Yeah,
yes.
Taylor's working on it. And we got season 1 finally on.
That's right.
And when I say we, I mean Taylor got season 1 on the on the website, so that's there now. So yeah, and we're working very hard now on the specifics and guidelines for the mentorship program, which is going to be the first initiative that we launch, hopefully in a few months. Working hard with our fantastic board of advisors or advisory committee or whatever we call it. You can see who that is on the website as well, but wonderful group of people and the board of directors. And so we're hammering all those details out now. And as soon as we've got them worked out, we will announce that and people can apply for that. And it's really exciting. Okay, so that's that stuff. Getting to the show. This was a wonderful episode, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
With the great artist, Shirin Neshat. So I loved talking to her, as I think is quite evident. But what did you think?
I loved it. And, there's something very special for me hearing from an artist that I've been showing to my students for as long as I've been teaching. And
Wow.
I loved it. And the conversation you have, I think, is fantastic, not just for sort of veteran artists, but people who might be just starting out. Shirin talks about ways that she keeps going, ways that she pushes through blocks and downtimes.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah.
always re-examining sort of where you are and who you are in this sort of art world and the kind of work you make. It's a more of an existential conversation, but it's fantastic. It's just, the whole thing. I absolutely loved it. Yes.
Yeah, I love talking to her. She's as warm as she is brilliant.
And if you want to be inspired by her work ethic, this is the show to listen
to. Oh my God. I know. I teased her a little bit about that. She is so prolific. It's just incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, gosh, I better up my game.
Exactly. It's like, wow, I'm lazy.
Yeah. I mean, she's just so filled. She's like bursting with ideas. And she has this one thing that I got from talking to her was just, she has so much passion for the creative process, for life, for other people, for other people's struggles. She's passionate about understanding the human condition. I mean, these things are all so on the surface and so there, and it seems to drive her to just want to keep making and expressing herself and expressing ideas. And she's less concerned with how things land and more concerned with just getting these things out there, out of her, right? Out of her body and out into the world. And they're going to land the way they're going to land, but she's just going to keep on working. And anyway, extremely inspiring, really incredible.
Absolutely. And not surprisingly, a really interesting origin story.
Yes.
So the whole thing from beginning to end, it's just wonderful.
Yeah. Well, before we give it away, why don't we get to it? Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
My pleasure. And here's your conversation with Shirin Neshat.
Shirin Neshat, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. I have to say, I feel so lucky and grateful to have worked this out and that I have this time to talk with you. It's been such an absolutely wonderful experience for me doing my research. And of course, I know your work. That's why we wanted to have you on. But to really learn more and more about you has just been really engaging. And it's been a real joy. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, we start every show, instead of reading people's bios, which is so boring, I can't bear it, just ask people to tell the listeners about themselves and their sort of origins of where they're from and how they got to where they are today. So if you could do that and take all the time you want. Your story is obviously really interesting. And so, so
Thank
take
you.
it away.
Well, I'm an Iranian-born artist living in the U.S. since 1978, 79. And basically, my work ranges from photography to video installations to feature-length films, and I've recently been directing operas. So I'm quite an untraditional artist, moving between a lot of different forms. And originally, I studied at UC Berkeley, very unsuccessfully, I would say, as I went to graduate school there and undergraduate, but didn't quite blossom, or I didn't feel that at the time, at a young age, I had much to contribute to art making. So I stopped making art for, I would say, 11 years. And I moved to New York in the 80s, and then I discovered a whole fascinating art scene and really connected to the underground art world. And slowly I became inspired to make art again. But I think the most important other element I need to emphasize is that being Iranian, my education at UC Berkeley coincided with the Iranian Revolution. I came to the US in 1975, and the revolution happened in 1979. So part of my shortcoming at my education at Berkeley was that I was so taken aback by what was happening in my country, and soon the doors closed between Iran and US or anywhere in the world. And the diplomatic relationships were cut off, and there was war with Iraq. So I did also, was separated from my family for a good 10, 11 years. And my return to art making once I was back in New York was also inspired by my travel back to Iran after many, many years, and meeting my family and facing the country that had transformed upside down while I was absent. So New York and return to Iran all culminated in my urge to return to make art again, and now with a stronger conviction and a vision that I didn't have when I was so young at UC Berkeley.
You said something really interesting in a video piece that you did for the Tate. You tell this great story it's very brief, but I could really imagine it. It was very evocative. You tell a story of having tea in your family garden as a young girl and hearing the Quranic chanting happening from afar and bursting into tears, and that you didn't know if this was because you were so moved by it or because you were scared and anxious because your family didn't pray every day. They weren't as religious.
Yes.
And you said these emotions that built inside of me when I was young led to the kind of art that I make. Can you talk about that? I was very moved by that.
Yeah, I was raised in a city called Qazvin, which is one of the most religious, conservative cities in Iran, the third most religious city in Iran. So in one hand, my parents, my father and mother, were quite progressive and well-traveled and very modern and really dressed mostly European style. And they had a lifestyle that was absolutely not conservative and not religious. But on the outside, they were different people. And of course, the school where I studied was extremely conservative. And I remember that I was always faced with this divide between the world that took place inside my home and what transpired outside. And that I always was told that by not praying, by not going to the mosque, by drinking alcohol, by gambling, all of these, you end up in hell. And meanwhile, my family were drinking, and as amusement, they were gambling at nights with friends, or, they weren't wearing the veil and they weren't going to the mosque on a regular basis. So I remember as a young girl praying every day at home, thinking that I had to beg redemption from my family, that they were going to burn in hell. And it was that kind of mindset that we were grown up with as people who were caught in between an extremely traditional religious culture versus the opening of the culture to the world, to the Western culture, as the Shah at the time was really trying to Europeanize the country, introducing art and all kinds of languages and encouraging people to travel. And many people in Tehran dressing in completely modern fashion with miniskirts. And so this conflict between religious, conservative, traditional values versus the move toward a more global, more westernized idea of lifestyle was the very foundation of my upbringing. And so I really felt very conflicted as a young woman. And because I did have some attraction to religion, because most of my friends, best friends, were extremely religious. And I did really took some comfort in having an idea of faith, religion, and something that I believed in. And so I was very torn. And so later when I became an artist, you could see how much religion or questions in relation to religion played a big role. And yet, outside of the Islamic subjects, my work is also so rooted in Persian culture, more contemporary Iranian culture that has zero interest in the Islamic tradition. And so much of my work is this conversation between the past and the present, the Islamic versus the Persian culture of Iranian identity, the more modern versus, ancient Iran. And I really do think that one can go on, explain it in great detail, what that really means specifically. But I really do feel that has been a groundwork for my artistic vocabulary.
Well, also, if you don't mind, I would add, one word that comes up a lot when people are talking about your work or writing about it, or you're talking about it or writing about it, is the word contradiction and
Yes.
or paradox. And it seems to me that in a lot of ways, the philosophical and emotional, and it seems to me that so much of your work, the foundation is contradiction.
Yes.
And is inability or a disinterest in reconciling all of the contradictions that young girl felt, in the garden, that, maybe it wasn't that you weren't sure if you were moved or scared and anxious, but you were both. You were both moved by it and scared and anxious. And that is such a powerful, one of the things that, if you ever have been in therapy, I have, that you learn is that, I remember learning this when I was in therapy, when I was young, getting into trouble and being sent to therapy, was that you can have contradictory feelings. You can hold them at once.
Yeah.
You can love and hate. You can be very moved by something and scared by it. So it just seems to me that the foundation of your work on an emotional and philosophical level is contradiction.
It's such a good point because as a human being, I feel always so conflicted by my own different contradictory nature, Mm-hmm. I often feel extremely fragile and vulnerable and weak, but then there are times that I'm really at shock at how tough and strong I can be, especially in time of crisis, and that really is a different character that I see that I didn't know before. But if you really think more about my life, I've been in the West majority of my time, but my foundation, my character, emotional nature is very Iranian. Just to be specific, I'm here in New York having a show at a gallery in the contemporary art world, one of the finest galleries in the world. And yet my attention is with Iran and the revolution in Iran, which has absolutely nothing to do with the art world. And I'm like posting something today about a filmmaker who's gone on a hunger strike. And I'm thinking about him. I'm thinking about the poor people who just had earthquake and are living in the freezing cold in Iran. The government is not helping them. Then I'm thinking about my show, the reaction. So these are like completely opposite poles of, and this just gives you an example. And I feel like, my character or my artwork has sort of embodied who I am as a person, even the way I look, for example, how a part of me is quite Eastern, my makeup or jewelry that I use, but yet I'm so fascinated by minimal, modern style of clothing. And I'm extremely independent and very free, yet I'm so attracted to being in places that are actually, the culture is pretty oppressive and very unlike the Western culture. There's everything about me that sort of, cries out opposite directions. And I think when you look at my history as an artist, where, let's say, the work that I've done that is about men versus women, culture versus nature, violence versus mysticism, inner world versus outer world, you name it, everything I make, whether it's a photograph, a video, or a movie, is always created around some notion of contradiction, some notion of opposite. That's because that's the way I see the world. That's the way I see myself. That's the way I understand things exist in that kind of yin and yang. And I'm always telling myself, all you have to do is just look at yourself and see that, you're the definition of that kind of contradiction. And every day I have to remind myself of that, my own imperfection, my own humanity, and that every one of us lives with a demon inside of us, yet we're quite innocent and beautiful as beings, So I'm unable to see anything in one form, I guess. Purely violent, purely beautiful. My work are extremely aestheticized and very poetic and beautiful, but always dark and melancholic and painful and extremely emotional.
Tell me, I'm really fascinated about the hiatus that you took from art making after Berkeley, and what exactly happened, if you don't mind my sort of probing here a bit. What exactly happened when you went back to Iran? You hadn't seen your family for 11 years. You go back to Iran and something happens to you. You wind up, I think, producing Women of Allah.
Yes.
Which really put you on the map, just to use dumb art world lingo, but really made you quite famous. And we can talk about that series, and I do want to talk about it. But I really, really want to know, was it a lightning bolt?
Yeah.
Was it something that sort of dawned on you a little bit each day? But what happened? Because this is a podcast that's, our listeners are primarily artists, and I think that's just always fascinating to really understand when you've had a quiet period or a period where you're not making art at all and then you're inspired. Obviously it's different for each person, but how did it happen for you when you were in Iran? And
first I have to explain that, my work at school, I would say, was quite mediocre. And I'm the first one to admit it, and I'm lucky I destroyed every evidence of it. But there is this thing that didn't fit my character very well, which was the whole education's emphasis on working hard at school to finding your own signature work, and then the rest of your life you continue to elaborate on that style or whatever it is you're doing, and you just get better at it, and then you follow a career and all that. Well, first of all, I have a hard time with mediocrity. I think it's better not to participate in any field of culture with anything that it's potentially mediocre. The second thing is, I don't think that artists are born talented. I think this is not something that comes from your intuition, that you're somehow are given a gift and you're going to school because that gift has to come out of your brain into the studio on some canvas. I really feel that art is something that you seek and it grows in you by living a life that is full of adventure, experiences, knowledge, putting yourself on that edge, and sometimes pain. And so, as a young 18, 19, 20-year-old kids that we go to school, in principle, I have something wrong about, how many of us are that genius that we can just be born with that talent. It happens. But so for me, that distance, and first of all, my understanding that my work was mediocre was a great, great understanding and realization. And I'm so glad that I came to that. The second thing, when I came to New York, I worked for 10 years in a not-for-profit organization called the Storefront for Art and Architecture, where I devoted my life and time to other artists, architects, and thinkers' work. And that became my true education and an incredible exposure to minds and people whose work was really based on lots of research and information. Hardly anyone I met was making work that was purely intuitive. And, it was a really enriching experience of this exposure for me. So by the time I went back to Iran, by then I was 30, I believe, I had achieved a certain level of maturity, certain methodology, certain grasp of artistic value, things that I cared for, the directions of art making that I really appreciated. But I was lacking the subject matter or something that I was passionate about. Once I arrived in Iran, it's not, again, I want to insist, and I encourage all the artists not to ever make art for career. I was there and I felt so fascinated, at the same time terrified by what had transpired in Iran during my absence, that I started to go back, every year for at least 2-3 years. And all of this, when I came back to New York, I felt that this relationship had to somehow continue even while I was in New York. So making art that reflected on what my findings were in Iran helped keep that fire alive. Even though I was now married to an American Korean man, I had a child, and I was working at a not-for-profit gallery, but I had now this niche, very private one, that I could just continue to think and read and work and research about these subjects that I had faced in Iran. All of this culminated in Woman of Allah. But again, these were not intended as an artistic move or career move. It just happened that a person saw something I was playing with and said, "Oh, I'm interested in showing us." Like, "You are?" And I only have 2 pictures, And it was, I always felt that when they said, "I'd like to talk to you about your work," they were talking about the storefront, not me. And somebody finally said, no, I'm talking about you. But I said, I've only made 3 photographs. So this was really my blessing, the fact that I didn't arrive at the art world by seeking success or climbing the ladder or even any ambition, because I pretty much resigned to the idea that I would never be an artist. So it happened just accidentally. And then from then on, the evolution of the work and the career just happened very organically.
I mean, the work is so rigorous. So, one thing I take from what you just said is the passion you must have felt and the real drive to produce this work, even though you didn't have a gallery then, or you didn't, there wasn't any exterior forces pushing you, but the work is so rigorous. And, let's talk about that and explain what we mean, because, they're not just photographs. They're photographs with beautiful calligraphy over the photographs. These are poems, texts that were written by Iranian women poets. So you have to find those words that you want to write, your hand drawing everything. They're spectacularly beautiful, but it's such rigorous work. So you must have had just such intense, inner drive to produce that. And I agree with you, by the way, 100%. I think whenever you're trying to do something for the art world, it's a disaster. You have to.
Yeah.
That's not a pure place. There's no authenticity in that. One thing that obviously sort of goes back to what we were talking about before in contradiction and whatnot is the text is obviously, or it seems to me, extremely important, but a Western audience can't read it. So it becomes just sort of part of the aesthetics, and we have an idea, but unless someone tells us what the words are, we don't know. And so if I sort of understand correctly, there was some frustration for you about how the work was interpreted. Is that right? Or
well, I have to first explain that, when I first made this body of work, I honestly didn't have the audience in mind. I was just playing around with kind of inventing my aesthetic, my concepts, and what was truthful to the ideas that I had, thematically being related to the Iranian Revolution, the religious fervor, the fanaticism that flourished in the culture of Iran, and how it impacted the lives of women, but more specifically, how violence played a big role by the government encouraging, even institutionalizing the idea of martyrdom, which caused another contradiction where men and women who loved God and were devoted to their religion were encouraged to commit cruelty, violence, and ultimately became obsessed with death in the promise of heaven after life. And I find this extremely contradictory to the nature of a woman who gives birth and is so sensual, etc., etc. So I created these images that really symbolically they brought the elements of the veil, the female body, the weapon, and the text, all of which were going in different directions to create these narratives that really raised a lot of questions more than any answer. Now, the text obviously had to be Farsi text because it was relating to Iran. And my focus was on poetry written by Iranian women, who I found quite inspiring, and how, in fact, many of these ladies' poetry tricked off the images, in my opinion. And then, every element, for example, the female body, always suggesting a notion of sin, shame, eroticism, and yet it became a sort of a contested space for politics, for religious values, traditional values, etc. So there were all these more theoretical concepts that were at play. But when it came to aesthetic, I was very inspired by classic Islamic art, classic Persian art, the integration of text and the image. As Iranians, and even in ancient times, were not allowed to depict any kind of spiritual holy figures. Everything was just written or drawn, And so I was very impressed by that, how it shows in manuscripts, in Persian miniature paintings, to the architecture of, Islamic nature. And so I felt that what I was doing was sort of elaborating a sort of a modern readaptation of Persian and Islamic art. So again, nothing to do with Western art or art history. But when it came time to actually expose the art to the Western viewers, I did try to provide the translation, but, those texts would it would mean very differently to an Iranian than a Westerner, even if you provided the translation, because the Western audience lacks the context that is written.
Yeah, of course.
It's like I always say, an African art means very differently to an African than to a Western audience, because the relationship is very different. However, just to point at what you mentioned, the series continued to be extremely controversial and provocative for Iranians and the Western audience. Some people accuse me of sort of endorsing the Islamic Republic and sort of sensationalizing violence and taking their side, where in fact I wasn't. And in fact, I've been living in exile for a long time. Where they felt that I was aestheticizing violence in many ways, or the fanaticism that came from that culture of the Islamic Republic. And in the West, some people embraced it, but some people also felt that it was sensationalizing or exoticizing violence, etc. But the truth is, at the time, I didn't ingrain my own point of view. I was just trying to simply create a body of work that raised a lot of questions, never provided any answers, and was something that maybe later, as I got to know the Islamic Republic better, I think my knife became sharper. But at the time, I was romanticizing a little bit about this change in Iran, but I was not romanticizing violence at all. And as you can see, some of these images remained quite relevant to some of the issues that we're facing in Islamic culture. But nevertheless, they became very iconic and continue to be very controversial. And some people, particularly Iranians, still know me from that body of work. And this is something that was made from 1994 to 1997, so many years later. But it becomes a sort of my artistic identity for many people.
Well, I think that does happen with artists, right? Like the first thing that sort of really brings you to public attention sort of locks into people's minds. So you are incredibly prolific. I mean, it's sort of unbelievable. You've made a number of feature-length films, as you mentioned. You've made many video installations, and then, of course, all the photography with all the hand writing on it that's just so spectacularly beautiful and precise. And just a sort of process question, but how the heck do you manage all of this work, all of this, and are you working on numerous things at once, or do you try and not multitask and just focus on one thing at a time? Just very curious.
Well, I often ask myself the same question. Why am I so restless? and the truth is, it's not like I'm so gifted or talented. It's more about, again, my character, where I have a hard time repeating myself over and over again. And when I started to do those photographs, such as Woman of Allah, and people began to identify me as, oh, this artist who makes these photographs and writes on it, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be known by that. I moved to video, and I completely turned my back against my signature work, which by then was doing well. And then once people started to say, oh, she's the artist who makes these double channel projections, and, I made many, I said, okay, now I need to move on. I meant to feature length film where I started from scratch, and now I'm doing opera. The truth is that, I really like to challenge myself. And this is in my nature. I mean, I am a nomadic person, as you know. But I find that every time I embrace a new project, but more a new form, it really, I feel excited as a beginner, something that, like a new love relationship. You need to dance around each other's potentials. I need to first learn the language and then find my own signature within that language. And it could so easily lead to failure and mediocre work. But when you're in it, the process is so exciting, because just like when I was doing photography, I never studied photography. I never owned a camera. But the idea that I was in a journey that I didn't know where it was ending, it was just thrilling. But when you get to, and this is what it becomes very stagnating, when people start to recognize you feel like you've reached a point where you already know where it's leading. And there's not so much excitement or an adventure. And I love the idea that I'm moving in this direction that I really don't know where it's going to. And it's just taking me, and I'm responding to it step by step. And it's, of course, very frightening, and also gives a possibility that your audience who were faithful to you for another medium will now leave you, forget you, or dislike what you're doing now. But what does that mean for you? If I had to choose, I think I would rather fail, but continue to experiment and embrace new forms than just stay with photography or video or film. I just want to just keep moving, and it really makes you feel like a young artist, even if you're not a young artist. And so in process, I've made some good work, some not so good work, but I have to say that I would never change it for anything, And I want to mention something about, my relationship to photography. It's really about making portraiture. And there is nothing more powerful about capturing human emotion, soul, whether it's conveyed through their gaze or the body expression, regardless how many millions of times people have captured it. Every time you get something new, something fresh. And that single moment where you are working with photography, that an audience could have such a profound relationship with that one image. That one image can tell the whole story. Where with video and film, you need the help of the camera movement, the sound design, music, production design, performance, locations, the pacing, the storytelling art. And so for me, these two mediums are demanding completely different attention.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
But they're also very incredibly powerful in their own means. And so if I can create one image where it possibly can move an audience to tears, and then I can make a 15-minute video that could equally be impactful, well, that's fantastic, but not always I achieve that, you see. But that's the goal, is that how can you take a concept and translate it into two different mediums, like I did with Land of Dreams or the current work that I have at Gladstone. So that's how I set out, is like, let me see how I can, achieve this goal. And that sometimes there's pauses in between that I go through this period of being lost and confused and unsure of myself, unsure about the direction that I'm going. And I crash, and then I come back up and I get excited about an idea. I forget about the past and I move forward with confidence. But it's always like taking risk and taking my chances and really going through this kind of artistic emotional roller coaster of having doubts and lack of confidence, to the moments where you feel like nothing is going to stop me. I'm definitely going to go for this, regardless of, what. And so it's, again, going back to that contradiction of your own nature, where you have so much doubt, but yet so much confidence moving forward.
Well, so let's talk about, first of all, thank you. That was really valuable and interesting. You mentioned Land of Dreams and the colossus that is Land of Dreams. And I really want to talk about it because obviously sort of a departure for you in terms of subject matter. I don't think in terms of what you're preoccupied with or the things you're interested in or who you are, the way in which you're comfortable with contradiction and nuance and the amount of work you want the audience to do, et cetera, et cetera. But just in terms of the most fundamental thing, which is, subject matter. So instead of me talking, can you tell people about the whole big project that was Land of Dreams?
Yeah, actually, Land of Dreams was a project that for the first time translated to a collection of still photography, 110 photographs, to a set of video installation, to channel projection, and a feature-length film. So it was like my first...
couldn't you have done more? This is where I just feel you were very lazy.
Well, it took a few years, but I was just wondering if it's possible for the first time that I could culminate all my interests in these three different mediums in one idea, which was about collecting dreams, about the importance of dreams. And, talking about contradiction, it's about the blurring of the boundary between East and West, about an Iranian woman immigrant such as myself, who's a photographer and goes door to door to American people's homes and asks to collect their dream. And in the video, she actually ends up at an Iranian colony that dubiously interprets American people's dreams. So it was also satirical and sort of pointed at antagonism between US and Iran. But really, for me, it was this massive interest in how in our subconscious minds, we are all the same. Our anxieties and fears, where they live in our dreams, are often projections of our humanity and the things that we fear about, we're anxious about, such as, violence, displacement, war, abandonment, a fear of death, And this is one place that we are all the same. And I thought that was a very beautiful and poetic way of approaching the story of an Iranian woman immigrant who is trying to blend in. And in the feature film, it was even more satirical because the same actress, actually same woman, this time worked for the American government, the Census Bureau, where they were spying on the American citizens' subconscious minds and their dreams and collecting people's dreams to know what people are fearful about, which also very ironic. And it was really like a more futuristic concept. And then in the photographs, I went in New Mexico. Everything happened in New Mexico. I photographed over 200 people from very distinct backgrounds, from African-American, Hispanic, white, old, young, women, men, children, and also asking for their dreams, and all of which were inscribed or illustrated in the photographs. So it was this massive project that really... it was, for me, it was a breathtaking departure because it was my first entry or my first attempt to make a work that really did not take place in Iran or did not intend to explore Iranian culture, but it was really the main protagonist was an Iranian woman photographer. So it was really about me, and I enjoyed it tremendously.
And you did that not in collaboration, but or was this commissioned by Site Santa Fe or?
No, I just do it, and then eventually Site Santa Fe invited it because it was shot in New Mexico, and this way the people in New Mexico got to see it,
And so how did it feel? Did it feel different working with American?
Incredible.
Yeah, tell me.
I think making Land of Dreams, the photography, the video, and the feature-length film, which, by the way, was shot during the pandemic, one of the most breathtaking experiences I've had as an artist, as a human being, and my understanding that, I don't always have to make work that relates to Iran. As long as I'm Iranian, the work will remain Iranian from the point of view of an Iranian. But also I was so connecting to the people in that region, whether it was Native Americans. Actually, a lot of my subjects, I forgot to say, were Native Americans. Mm-hmm. And I just felt completely at home, welcomed. And Land of Dreams, I would say, opened a new door for me, where it led to The Fury, my latest work, where I can now work in the US, but still related to subjects that it's rooted in the Iranian culture, meaning rooted in experience of an Iranian immigrant, because I've not been to Iran for so long that I feel that I need to open this new chapter, which is about my experience in America.
Well, I don't remember where I read this or heard it in an interview, but, the understanding or acknowledgement that you have become, to some extent, American, just based on how long you've lived here. And of course, that doesn't in any way change where you come from and how formative and deeply that's in your soul. But it's interesting that you did get to that point where you sort of had that realization in your artwork.
Yes, I was talking to someone yesterday that, for the longest time living in the US, I always felt like an outsider, like riding the subway or on an airplane, going somewhere, or at the airport. And then now I live in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and I realized that actually, you know what? I'm probably more of an outsider to Iranians if I go to Iran, because this is where I've lived longest in my life. And in fact, these are my community. These are the people who obviously I see more than anyone. And that, especially, for example, where I am in Brooklyn, we all look different. We all speak different language. We have different religions. But we are so, at the same time, connected. And I feel so close to them. And that is a revelation that it took years and years and years for me to come to terms with. I'm still very connected to the Iranian community. I'm very active. During the revolution, I feel a true affinity with that culture. My mother is there, my sister's there, my nieces are there. So I have a huge relationship with Iran. But I have to say that I feel a great relief. And this really comes from finally me accepting to make work in the US, that I've come to understand that, my God, I can make work in this country and it's okay. I don't have to run off to Morocco, to Egypt, to Turkey, to Mexico to pretend that it's Iran. I can make work about this country and about me, and there's a lot of possibilities.
You've lived in this country longer than a lot of people have lived in this country. People who were born in this country.
Yeah,
and so,
you're right.
This country, whether everyone likes it or not, I personally like it. This country is a country of immigrants. And so...
And I wouldn't change it for the world, yes.
Yeah, that's right. And especially New York. And, New York is for everyone, and that's what makes it special. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today. It's just been such a joy getting to know you through my research and then getting this chance to talk with you. It's been my pleasure, and thank you for the wonderful questions you ask, and I hope we meet once in person. Yes, definitely. Let's do that. That would be a real thrill for me. So thanks again, and be well. Enjoy the rest of your day. Okay.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The associate producer is Taylor Selsback, and the executive producer is Sasha Wolf. Our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe and rate us with all the stars available on your listening platform.